Even if TSMC churns out 3nm or 5nm chips, Samsung, Micron, and SK Hynix, the three major memory companies, possess significantly larger wafer production capacities, and Samsung is demonstrably the largest. Yes, hello everyone, this is Dr. Error. Many of you are interested in semiconductors and memory, and you've probably come across stories like this. Samsung became #1 in the world in semiconductors based on revenue, things like that. At the same time, you've probably heard that SK Hynix, as you see right here, recently surpassed Samsung in the DRAM market by exclusively supplying all of its HBM to Nvidia, haven't you? So today, I've prepared numerous graphs that could serve as extremely significant indicators, and I'll also take some time to organize information on the various types of DRAM. Ultimately, we'll delve into how the company that actively and diligently supplies HBM can ultimately emerge as the undisputed leader in the entire semiconductor industry. If you look here, based on last year, Intel is also included. You can see that Samsung is #1, beating out the famous Nvidia, Qualcomm, Broadcom, AMD, and even Apple. For the past few years, Intel and Samsung have been vying for the top spot, but Intel recently stumbled. Since the memory market has such a vast capacity, meaning the sheer volume of chips produced is immense, and revenue from mass production is substantial, this fundamental structure hasn't seen significant change. And here, as Hynix steadily supplied HBM to Nvidia, its growth has been truly explosive. The difference between these companies is that while Samsung and Intel are IDMs, doing both foundry and memory, most of the others like Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Apple, and AMD are fabless. For the high-revenue Korean companies, Samsung and SK Hynix, their business is mainly centered on memory semiconductors. As you probably know, memory, as the name suggests, is used for remembering and storing things, right? But this memory is also divided into DRAM and flash memory, like in the video I uploaded a week ago. Especially with flash memory, not only the big three SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron, but also Kioxia, formerly Toshiba, along with Chinese companies, and many others are all in fierce competition. So prices have actually declined somewhat. However, the DRAM market is almost exclusively dominated by those three companies, SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron. And of course, there are also various kinds of memory. Here is what's often called spinach, DRAM, DDR memory. In the case of system memory like this, its purpose is to process the commands coming sequentially into the CPU as quickly as possible. The largest capacity DRAM used by the CPU for storage is DDR memory. There's much talk about the shift to DDR5 as DDR4 is phased out. For this particular one, it's quite important how quickly it can deliver data when the CPU issues a command like, "Hey, get me that data fast." Besides that, there's also LPDDR and GDDR in the case of GDDR, for your graphics cards. GDDR is soldered directly onto components such as gaming graphics cards. It's specifically designed for efficiently handling substantial batches of structured data simultaneously, for instance, when processing massive images or performing 3D modeling within games. Therefore, rather than prioritizing the rapid response of individual data, the design was centered around how much data could be transferred simultaneously. So, while some say GDDR could be a rival to HBM, HBM has a much higher level of bandwidth. Okay, hey, the bus is leaving. This means it might take some time for the bus to fill up before it departs, but once it does, it can take a huge number of people and send them off all at once. And HBM, you can essentially comprehend it as akin to a 4 or 5-story bus. LPDDR, on the other hand, is specifically engineered for low power consumption. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is to illustrate how we can view their roles as memory from a different angle. For example, with this spinach module, you can easily plug it in yourself. There's a dedicated slot for it on the motherboard. There is a DIMM slot, which is a module that you plug into the DIMM slot on a computer's motherboard. However, smartphone DRAM doesn't feature a plug-in structure like this at all. This is an Apple iPhone. The small DRAM is simply soldered on, and the LPDDR is attached there. So, instead of the manual plug-in method I described earlier, and it's not a DIMM structure, they actually produce the LPDDR, and then directly solder it on. This is how NVIDIA graphics cards work. In this case as well, the GDDR for the RTX 4070 is attached right here and soldered on for use. So, the concept of attaching it flatly in a 2D structure on a standard board was the DRAM of the legacy market. A slightly more advanced form is what you see here, the kind that goes into laptops, a small SODIMM structure that you plug in. This also plugs in the same way, but it's a smaller structure. With CAM gaining popularity, LPCAM is receiving renewed attention. This is also a somewhat commercialized standard. So the concept behind the LPCAMM structure is to allow the high-performance, low-power LPDDR memory, which could previously only be soldered onto laptops, to be used by simply plugging it in like this. But the types of memory I've mentioned so far are what you'd commonly call legacy memory. Now this is what's emerging. For HBM, the logic part here would be a logic semiconductor like Nvidia's Blackwell or Hopper, and then the HBM part would be made by, for example, SK Hynix. Then they also make the base die underneath and connect them in what's called a CoWoS, a 2.5D structure. You might think it's similar to soldering, whether you solder it or plug it in by hand. You might ask, isn't HBM just soldered on here? But the key is that this is extremely fine work. Now in CoWoS, the interposer part, of course, doesn't use the very latest cutting-edge nanometer processes. It uses a much less advanced process, but it's still a structure for making a wafer, created with the same precision to connect this and that together. So with HBM, multiple thin DRAMs are vertically stacked using TSVs or through-silicon vias. This involves essentially an elevator system, connecting everything from the top down to form a high bandwidth connection. Vertically stacking them dramatically reduces the data travel distance. With DRAM, typically signals exit the chip. All signals normally go out, but this HBM structure, stacked vertically and shooting data through all at once, achieves high bandwidth. Also, logic components like the GPU are attached next to it using 2.5D packaging. Using a silicon interposer means these incredibly fine, densely connected components must be meticulously co-designed from the outset. It's not merely a matter of soldering, it requires collaboration with the client from day one. This is the fundamental difference compared to legacy DRAM. Now, because of this situation, traditional memory companies used to have a structure of mass-producing things like DDR, LPDDR, and GDDR in DIMM form factors, as I mentioned, to lower the unit cost. But that has now changed. How can we tell? Now, this is an article from Tons Hardware, published a couple of months ago, which states that Samsung will cease DDR4 production in the latter half of 2025, shifting its focus to DDR5, LPDDR, and HBM. So, if we consider DDR5 to be the most current next-generation form of legacy DRAM, they are discontinuing the manufacture of DDR4 chips in favor of concentrating on DDR5 or. They say they're going to focus on LPDDR, which is a new system. But what's really interesting about this is that the reason Hynix, Samsung, and Micron are no longer producing DDR4 isn't solely due to Chinese companies such as CXMT. They're pouring in massive subsidies and are now producing DDR4, taking up a huge chunk of the market. But the word is, it's not just because they are producing a lot of DDR4. I mean, Chinese companies like CXMT are cutting memory prices by 50% and are catching up fast. So actually, even during the DDR3 era, they abandoned it to concentrate on HBM3. SK Hynix and Samsung had done that before. But what's fascinating is, look at this. This is from May 27th. 1 month after that article, even CXMT announced it will no longer produce DDR4. They're dropping it. Then, on June 14th, this story comes out, the end of an era, meaning the age of DDR4 is now over. There's news that DDR4 production is finally coming to an end, but instead of simply taking the article at face value and assuming it's over, you need to recognize that a significant change has taken place in the memory market. What is it? Alright, let me show you a graph. Looking at this, Samsung has a high share in some areas and there's talk of TSMC being merchandised. What does this imply? Of course, this is based on 2022 data, but it's about how many wafers are produced per month. That's what this represents. What do I mean? Well, leading edge, which you can think of as what we commonly call high-end. The most advanced processes, for example, DDR4, DDR5, things like that. The company with the largest capacity to produce these is Samsung, followed by Micron. That's how you can see it. Even if TSMC produces many 3nm or 5nm chips, regarding wafer production capacity, the top 3 memory firms, Samsung, Micron, and SK Hynix, are immense. Samsung's share is notably dominant. Conversely, the lagging edge refers to the low-end market. This refers to older, more outdated versions, and even in that category, Samsung has a massive share. But if you look at mature processes, you can see TSMC is huge, right? In the foundry process. What we can learn from this is, first, you make the wafer. So just looking at the ability to produce semiconductors, these memory companies have a lot, and among them, you can see that Samsung is particularly dominant. So, when there's a transition period from DDR4 to DDR5, companies with large production capacity like Samsung will just keep producing DDR4 right to the very end. Even after other companies like Micron and Hynix discontinued DDR4, they continue to produce it to maximize their profits. In this graph, you can see China's influence, but mostly the portions are similar. Samsung's portion and market share are similar. Hynix's has grown a bit, right? It has grown, and looking at China from the inside out, don't you see it's grown significantly? Nanya has grown a lot too. Since China has already entered the DDR4 market this much, you might think, the other 3 companies had no choice but to discontinue it. But that's not all. The key is HBM. In this case, Samsung announced its sales and operating profit. So, as of the end of last year, how were the sales in 2024? You'll find 2024 has grown from 2023. It increased a lot, but this is Samsung's overall figure. For semiconductors, we must check the DS division. See how much the DS division also grew? It grew from 66 to 111 trillion won, with memory soaring remarkably. However, the issue, as I mentioned, is that Samsung possesses so many manufacturing facilities, known as fabs, that its revenue is heavily influenced by whether these facilities are operational or not. Yet, revenue isn't the sole concern. The operating profit of the DS division has also returned to positive figures as of 2023. The real problem, though, is that this level isn't all that substantial when we compare it to SK Hynix. If you look at this, it shows HBM revenue. In 2022, the entire HBM market was only 2.6% of the total DRAM market. It's like the foldable phone market. It grew in 2023 and will reach 20% in 2024. That's a significant increase. So if we break down the leverage in this HBM sector, first on the left, who is dominant in terms of HBM revenue? As anyone can see, SK Hynix accounts for up to 95% as of 2024. So you can say SK Hynix took almost everything until last year. That's why Hynix is in yellow. There was a time when this share dropped to 27% in 2023. This varies from quarter to quarter, but they have been rapidly increasing this market share based on HBM in the overall memory market. Breaking it down, Hynix's DRAM revenue is always largest. When the memory market declined in 2023, everything shrank overall. However, if you consider the main components, DRAM consistently accounts for over half. This time, with record high revenues, core memory technologies were directed towards the DRAM server sector, progressively expanding their share. SK Hynix, specifically, based on HBM, significantly boosted its revenue in 2023 and 2024, rapidly increasing operating profit. 2018 was truly a record year, but they achieved even higher profits than that, and this year will be even greater, with next year projected to be much higher. I've heard incredible figures like 60 trillion won. That's how much the value add of HBM is increasing. And moving forward, HBM3E is set to become the dominant force. Micron was late to HBM and seemed focused on HBM3. Now, HBM3E's critical importance to Samsung and Micron is being discussed as it's set to boost revenue significantly. Looking at this, in the past, when trying to move from DDR4 to DDR5, companies with relatively smaller capacity like Micron and SK Hynix had to stop producing DDR4 on their leading-edge lines first. That's how you move to DDR5. Meanwhile, Samsung, with its large capacity, just kept them running. Let's sell as much DDR4 as possible. DDR4 prices are rising again because they're being discontinued, but not anymore. Even CXMT won't produce DDR4. Why? To quickly produce and test HBM. HBM4 talk is everywhere. It's more important to produce those first and generate profit. We're in an era where rapid process changes or switching from DDR4 to DDR5 matters less. So looking at various graphs, the demand for HBM will continue to grow, and their added value is literally in a high state. Instead of churning out legacy processes, the current framework indicates that producing more HBM yields significantly higher profits. As illustrated in the graph I first showed you, this means overall revenue will surge for the top 3 memory companies due to much stronger HBM demand. Consequently, Samsung, which already ranks first in total semiconductor revenue, will continue to hold that top spot. But companies like SK Hynix, which are taking over the HBM market, are now in a position where they can aim for the top spot. It used to be that the top 3 memory companies just had to make and sell the same legacy DRAM, but now we're in an era where Nvidia's quality is important, and AMD's quality is even more important. The core capability is whether you can customize and precisely deliver what customers want, under the conditions they specify, much like TSMC. This leads to many considerations, not just about increasing capacity, but also how to effectively manage that capacity. So, I've organized some key points to help you better understand the memory industry itself. We continue uploading videos on the Unreal Tech channel for those who prefer to research. We're also quickly sharing entertaining reels and other easy-to-view news updates on Instagram, so please show us plenty of interest. And we've recently started doing shorts too. For those of you who are interested, you can even watch me dancing my heart out, so please show a lot of interest in our shorts. This has been Dr. Error.